Jason Carter pulled into his driveway, exhausted from another long day at work. The cool evening air was a welcome relief after hours spent in his stuffy office, but something felt off. It wasn't the darkness creeping across the sky or the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. It was the feeling of eyes on him. He turned his head slightly, just enough to see his neighbor, Karen Wilkins, standing on her porch across the street. Her arms were folded, her lips pursed in that familiar expression of suspicion she always wore when she saw him. Jason had lived in this neighborhood for 3 years, yet Karen still acted like he was some kind of stranger. He sighed, choosing to ignore her. It wasn't worth the energy. He grabbed his bag from the passenger seat, shut the car door, and walked toward his garage. He had barely set foot inside when he heard the all-too-familiar click of Karen's front door opening. Jason didn't have to turn around to know she was watching his every move. It was almost routine at this point, her subtle, or not so subtle, way of making sure he wasn't up to something. He shook his head, forcing himself to stay calm. He had done nothing wrong. He had no reason to feel guilty. Sliding his key into the side door, he entered the garage and hit the button to close it. The mechanical hum of the door lowering was the only sound filling the space. As it descended, shutting out the world behind him, he exhaled, letting some of the tension roll off his shoulders. And then, a whisper. Jason froze. His body went rigid, every hair on his arms standing on end. The sound was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A hushed voice. Inside his garage. His heart pounded against his ribcage. Was he hearing things? He took a slow, careful step forward, straining his ears. Nothing. Silence. Maybe it was his mind playing tricks on him. Maybe he was just tired, but just as he was about to dismiss it, he heard it again. A whisper. Louder this time. He wasn't alone. Before he could react, blinding red and blue lights exploded against the walls of his garage. The sharp glare bounced off his workbench, casting long, eerie shadows. A police car had screeched to a stop in front of his driveway. Then, shouting, "Sir, step out of the garage! Hands where we can see them!" Jason's breath caught in his throat. His pulse skyrocketed. What the hell was happening? He turned toward the now half-open garage door, squinting against the flashing lights. Two uniformed officers stood outside, hands resting on their holsters. Their faces were serious, their posture stiff, and there, standing on the sidewalk with her phone still in hand, was Karen. Jason clenched his jaw. Of course. The realization settled like a rock in his stomach. She had called the cops. Again. He should have expected it. This wasn't the first time she had assumed he didn't belong in his own neighborhood. Jason held up his hands, stepping forward slowly. His mind raced, anger bubbling beneath his skin, but he forced himself to stay calm. "This is my house," he said, his voice steady but firm. "I live here." One of the officers took a step closer. "We got a report of suspicious activity, a possible break-in." Jason let out a sharp, bitter laugh. He turned his head toward Karen, who was still standing there, watching with wide eyes. "You called the cops on me for walking into my own garage?" Karen's lips parted, as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Maybe she was just now realizing how ridiculous she sounded, or maybe she wasn't sorry at all. The other officer spoke up. "Sir, do you have ID?" Jason exhaled slowly. He knew better than to argue. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out his wallet and handed over his driver's license. The officer took it, glancing between Jason's photo and his face before stepping back toward the patrol car. Jason stood there, fists clenched at his sides. He could feel the weight of Karen's gaze on him, could feel the frustration simmering inside him. And then, crash! A loud noise erupted from inside the garage. Jason's head snapped toward the sound. The officers did the same. "What was that?" one of them asked. Jason's stomach twisted. That whisper. That sound. Someone was in his garage. And suddenly, Karen's 911 call didn't seem so ridiculous. Because she hadn't just called the cops on an innocent man. She had unknowingly saved his life. The silence that followed the crash was thick and suffocating. Jason's breath hitched, his body frozen in place as his brain tried to process what had just happened. His garage was supposed to be empty. He had lived alone for years. No roommates, no pets, no one else coming in or out. And yet, something or someone was inside. One of the officers instinctively reached for his weapon. The other took a cautious step toward the garage, shining his flashlight into the dim space. Jason felt his pulse hammering in his throat as his mind raced for an explanation. A raccoon? A stray cat? A stack of boxes falling over? No, that wasn't what he had heard. That whisper. The officers exchanged a glance, both now on high alert. The one holding Jason's ID gave it back to him with a sharp nod, his previous suspicion now replaced with concern. Sir, is there anyone else inside your house? Jason shook his head. No, I live alone. The second officer, still gripping his holstered gun, took another step toward the garage. Stay here. Jason clenched his jaw, wanting to argue. It was his house, his space, and he had every right to see what was going on. But logic won. If someone was inside, if there was a real threat, he wasn't about to be reckless. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, scanning the cluttered garage, Jason's toolboxes, his workbench, the old bicycle he swore he'd fix one day. Nothing seemed out of place. And then the light landed on a pair of feet. Jason's stomach dropped. There, behind the workbench, partially hidden by a stack of storage bins, bare feet. The officers handed to his weapon, gripping his radio. We have a suspect. Show yourself. Hands up. Jason's world tilted on its axis. He wasn't imagining things. Someone had been in here. Someone was still in here. A slow movement, a shuffle. Then, inch by inch, a figure stepped into the dim light. Jason's breath caught in his throat. The man was thin, disheveled, his clothes wrinkled and stained with sweat and dirt. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, darting back and forth between Jason and the officers. His hands trembled at his sides, as if he were caught between fight and flight. But it wasn't just any man. It was his brother. Marcus? Jason's voice cracked. Marcus didn't answer. His gaze flickered between the cops and Jason, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He looked smaller than Jason remembered. His usual confident stance was gone, replaced with something else. Fear. The officers remained on edge, their training telling them not to lower their guard. Sir, step forward slowly. Hands where we can see them. Jason could barely breathe. His mind reeled with 1,000 questions. Marcus, his younger brother, the one he hadn't seen in over a year, the one who had vanished without a trace. What the hell was he doing in Jason's garage? Wait, Jason said quickly, stepping forward. This is my brother. The officers hesitated. Marcus swallowed hard, his eyes locked onto Jason's, and for a moment something flickered there. Relief, maybe, or desperation. Jay, Marcus finally croaked, his voice hoarse. I can explain. Jason stared at him, struggling to make sense of this nightmare. He had spent months wondering where Marcus had gone, why he had suddenly disappeared. No phone calls, no messages, just silence. And now, here he was, hiding in Jason's garage like some kind of fugitive. The officer closest to Marcus kept his hand near his holster. Sir, we need to check if he has any outstanding warrants. Jason snapped out of his daze. That's not necessary. It's protocol, the officer said firmly. We'll just run his name through the system. Marcus stiffened at that. Jason noticed the way his hands twitched, how his breathing became shallower. Something was wrong. Jason turned to him. Marcus, what's going on? Marcus licked his lips, hesitating. His eyes darted toward the street, the sidewalk, as if looking for an escape. Jason's stomach twisted. Marcus. And then, in the lowest whisper, Marcus finally answered. They're looking for me, Jay. Jason felt his blood run cold. The officers exchanged a look, their postures tightening. Jason took a shaky breath. Who? Marcus swallowed hard, the raw fear on his face sending a new wave of dread through Jason's body. I saw something, Marcus said, voice barely above a whisper. Something I wasn't supposed to see. Jason's pulse pounded in his ears, and then a car rolled slowly past the house, a black sedan, tinted windows, moving too deliberately, too cautiously. Jason saw the way Marcus tensed, his whole body locking up, the way his breathing became ragged. Jason turned his head slightly, just in time to see the sedan pause at the stop sign down the street. It lingered there, idling, watching. The night had gone from unsettling to terrifying in a matter of seconds. Marcus wasn't just hiding, he was running for his life. Jason shut the front door behind them, locking it twice before turning to face his brother. The weight of the moment pressed heavily against his chest. Marcus stood in the dimly lit hallway, shifting nervously from foot to foot, his gaze darting between the windows as if expecting someone to burst through at any moment. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Jason finally broke the silence, his voice low but firm. Start talking. Marcus exhaled shakily, running a hand through his unkempt hair. Up close, he looked even worse. His clothes were wrinkled and stained, dark circles hung under his eyes, and his hands were still trembling. "I messed up, Jay," he muttered. "Bad." Jason crossed his arms, anger beginning to bubble beneath his concern. "You disappeared for a year, no calls, no texts, then I find you hiding in my garage like some kind of criminal? You better give me a damn good explanation." Marcus glanced toward the window again, hesitating. Jason's patience was wearing thin. "Who's looking for you?" Marcus swallowed hard. "Some bad people." Jason clenched his jaw. That much was obvious. Marcus took a deep breath, his voice unsteady. "A few nights ago, I was staying with a guy I know. We were crashing at his place, just laying low." He hesitated. "He's mixed up in some stuff. Deals, money laundering. I didn't ask too many questions. I just needed a place to crash." Jason felt his stomach tighten. "Marcus." "I wasn't involved." Marcus snapped, holding up his hands. "I swear, Jay, I was just there. I didn't know what kind of people he was dealing with." Jason narrowed his eyes but didn't say anything. Marcus took another deep breath. "That night, some guys showed up. They weren't there to talk." Jason felt a chill run down his spine. Marcus clenched his fists. "They took my friend into the back room. I heard yelling, arguing, then a gunshot." Jason's pulse pounded in his ears. Marcus licked his lips, his voice barely above a whisper. "I saw the guy who did it, tall, built like a damn machine, had a scar running down his face. He didn't see me at first, but then—" Marcus shut his eyes briefly, as if trying to push the memory away. "I made a noise, a stupid little noise, and he turned." Jason barely breathed. Marcus looked at him, his eyes filled with something Jason had never seen before. True, raw fear. "He saw me, Jay." Jason felt his blood turn ice cold. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the sound of their breathing. Jason rubbed his hands over his face, trying to process what his brother was telling him. "You saw a murder?" Jason said slowly. "And now the guy who did it is looking for you?" Marcus nodded. Jason swore under his breath, pacing the small space of the living room. This wasn't just some petty street drama. This was serious. "Did you go to the cops?" Jason asked. Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "And tell them what? That I was hiding in a house full of criminals when I accidentally witnessed an execution?" He shook his head. "No way, Jay. These guys, they have connections. Cops, politicians, people in places they shouldn't be." Jason's chest tightened. He wanted to argue, to tell Marcus he was overreacting, but deep down, he knew his brother was probably right. "How long have you been hiding?" Marcus hesitated. "Since it happened." Jason frowned. "And you came here because—" Marcus met his eyes. "Because I had nowhere else to go." Jason swallowed hard. His brother had always been the reckless one, the one who got into trouble but somehow always managed to talk his way out of it. But this was different. A car engine rumbled outside. Both men froze. Jason turned toward the window, peering through a small gap in the blinds. The black sedan was back. His stomach dropped. It was parked across the street now, its engine idling, headlights off. "They found me," Marcus whispered. Jason's hands curled into fists. No, he wasn't about to let these people take his brother. He turned to Marcus, his voice low and serious. "We're not running anymore." Marcus looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" Jason's jaw tightened. "I mean, if they want you, they're going to have to go through me first." Jason moved quickly, shutting off the lights and pulling Marcus away from the window. His mind was racing, but his instincts were sharp. Whoever was in that car wasn't just there by coincidence. They were watching, waiting. Marcus was breathing heavily beside him, his shoulders hunched like he was trying to make himself smaller. Jason had never seen his younger brother like this before. Marcus had always been the smooth talker, the one who could charm his way out of anything. But now he looked like a man being hunted. Jason pressed his back against the wall, peeking through the blinds again. The car was still there, its engine idling in the eerie quiet of the neighborhood. No one got out, no movement, just waiting. A cold knot of fear twisted in Jason's gut. "They've been following me. Everywhere I go, they're there, watching. I thought I lost them, but—" Jason shot him a sharp look. "How did you even get here without them catching you?" "I took side streets, back alleys, stayed in bus stations overnight. I thought I shook them, Jay. I really did." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, frustration bleeding into his voice. "But they must have been tracking me somehow." Jason clenched his jaw. That meant one thing. They're not leaving. he said quietly. Marcus swallowed hard. Jay, I can't stay here. I don't want to bring this to your doorstep. Jason turned to him, his voice low but firm. You already did. Marcus flinched at the words, guilt flashing across his face. But Jason wasn't blaming him, not really. He just needed to think, to figure out the next move. The next knock at the door made both of them jump. It wasn't loud or aggressive. It was deliberate, controlled. Whoever was on the other side wasn't in a hurry. Marcus took a step back, his face pale. Jason's pulse pounded in his ears. Another knock. Then a voice. Deep, cold. We know you're in there. Jason's stomach turned to ice. Marcus gripped his arm. Jay? Jason motioned for him to be quiet. The silence that followed was unbearable. The person outside wasn't trying to break in. They weren't yelling or causing a scene. They were just standing there, waiting for a response. That was worse. Jason carefully stepped forward, staying low as he approached the peephole. He hesitated before looking. A tall man stood on the porch. He was built like a tank, his broad shoulders stretching the fabric of his black jacket. But it wasn't just his size that made Jason's stomach drop. It was his face. A long scar ran from his temple down to his jawline. Marcus had described him perfectly. Scarface. The man exhaled slowly, then reached into his pocket. Jason tensed, half expecting a gun, but instead the man pulled out a cigarette, lighting it with casual ease. He took a drag before speaking again, his voice smooth, almost amused. You can open the door, or we can do this the hard way. Jason's fingers curled into fists. Marcus took another step back. Jay, we have to get out of here. Jason's mind raced. Running wasn't an option. The moment they stepped outside, they'd be exposed. But staying put wasn't much better. If this guy was willing to knock on the front door like he owned the place, he wasn't bluffing. Jason took a deep breath, trying to suppress the growing rage inside him. Then he spotted his phone on the counter. An idea hit him. He picked it up, quickly typing a message. 911, home invasion attempt. Send police now. He pressed send. Scarface was still outside, taking another slow drag of his cigarette. Then, as if sensing Jason's hesitation, he chuckled softly. Tick-tock. Jason's heart pounded. Then another sound. A second car pulling up. Not a police cruiser. Another black sedan. Marcus's breath hitched. Jay? Jason backed away from the door, eyes darting toward the kitchen. The back door. We're getting out of here, Jason whispered. Marcus hesitated, fear flashing in his eyes. Then, as if in slow motion, Scarface reached for the door handle. Jason's blood ran cold. The lock rattled. Scarface wasn't waiting anymore. Jason grabbed Marcus's arm, pulling him toward the back of the house. He didn't know where they were going, only that they had to move. Now. Because the real nightmare was just beginning. Jason yanked Marcus toward the back door, his pulse slamming against his ribs. Every instinct screamed that they had seconds before Scarface and whoever was in that second car made their move. The doorknob at the front jiggled again, harder this time. A quiet click followed. Jason didn't stick around to see if the lock held. He pushed Marcus ahead of him into the kitchen, grabbing the nearest weapon within reach, a heavy, cast iron skillet. Marcus shot him a look. A pan? Really? Jason ignored him, cracking the back door open just enough to peek outside. The backyard was shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from the dim glow of the street lamp filtering through the fence slats. No movement, no signs of anyone waiting. Yet. Jason exhaled. We go fast, we go quiet. Marcus nodded, swallowing hard. Jason eased the door open wider, stepping onto the back porch. The cold night air hit his skin, sending a chill down his spine, but there was no time to think about that. Then, crash! The unmistakable sound of shattering glass exploded from the front of the house. They were in. Marcus stiffened. Jason grabbed his arm. Move! They bolted. Jason led the way, staying low as they sprinted across the yard. His mind was already calculating the next step. The fence. They had to get over the damn fence. Marcus got there first, scrambling up like his life depended on it, because it did. Jason was right behind him, gripping the top when, bang! Gunfire. The sound ripped through the night, a warning shot that sent a bolt of terror through Jason's chest. Marcus landed on the other side, stumbling slightly. Jay, come on! Jason swung his legs over, dropping down just as, bang! Another shot. This time, splintering wood where Jason's hand had just been. He didn't stop to think, didn't stop to breathe. He grabbed Marcus's arm and yanked him forward, sprinting into the neighboring yard. Adrenaline pounded through his veins. They crashed through bushes, stumbling onto the next street. The neighborhood was eerily silent. No porch lights flicking on, no curious neighbors stepping out to investigate the gunshots. Either they were all asleep, or they knew better than to get involved. Marcus wheezed beside him, out of breath. Jay, where the hell are we going? Jason scanned the street, mind racing. They needed a car. A place to hide. Something. Then he spotted it. A black SUV parked just a few houses down. Empty. But running. Hope and panic crashed into him all at once. Jason grabbed Marcus's arm, dragging him toward it. Don't ask questions. Marcus barely had time to register what was happening before Jason reached the driver's side and yanked the door open. Unlocked. Jason's gut twisted. A car like this? Left running, doors unlocked? It was a trap. Too late. A voice cut through the night. Going somewhere? Jason whipped around. Scarface stood a few yards away, his gun lowered but ready, a smirk curling his scarred face. Another man, slightly smaller but just as dangerous looking, stood beside him. Marcus stiffened. Jason felt his heartbeat hammering in his skull. Scarface tilted his head. You're making this a lot harder than it needs to be. Jason tightened his grip on the skillet, his only weapon. Yeah? That's kind of the point. The second man chuckled. Tough guy, Scarface exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders. Here's the deal. You give us Marcus, we leave you alone. His eyes gleamed in the dim light. Nice and easy. Jason didn't hesitate. Not happening. Scarface smirked. Didn't think so. Then, sirens. Red and blue lights washed over the street as a police cruiser screeched around the corner, tires screeching against the pavement. Scarface's smirk vanished. Shit, the second guy muttered. Jason's heart pounded with something new. Hope. The cops were here. Scarface took a step back, calculating. Jason saw the flicker of frustration in his eyes, the careful balance of knowing he couldn't afford a shootout but also not wanting to lose his prey. Then, with a sharp exhale, Scarface gave Jason one last look. This isn't over. And just like that, they turned and vanished into the night, slipping between houses before the cops could see them. The police car skidded to a stop. Officers jumped out, hands on their holsters. Jason exhaled, raising his hands. We're the ones who called. One officer scanned them, eyes narrowing. You the homeowner? Jason nodded. Not anymore. Marcus frowned. What? Jason turned to him, breathless, exhausted, but certain. They know where I live, he said. We can't stay here. Marcus swallowed. Then where do we go? Jason looked down the street at the empty space where Scarface had disappeared. And for the first time in his life, he realized they weren't running from trouble. They were running toward it.